So what's up, people? It's your boy OT and welcome to Steady Bro. Happy New Year, right? 2020 was a disaster. Let's just hope 2021 is a better year. Fingers crossed. Today, you'll be looking at how to interpret ECGs. ECGs are one thing that I struggle with during my medical career as a student. But when I took time to familiarize myself with it, I could figure out a thing or two. I'm no cardiologist by any stretch of the imagination, but it started to make sense. I could identify if something was abnormal or normal. So what are ECGs? ECGs measure the electrical conductivity of the heart, and from which we can then deduce whether the heart is functioning properly as we'd expect it to. What is the function of the heart? The heart functions as a pump to pump deoxygenated blood into the pulmonary circulation to get oxygenated by the lungs, and then pump oxygenated blood into the systemic circulation to the rest of the body for it to be utilized. Let's look at the basic pattern of an ECG. In an ECG, you will see a P wave, a QRS complex, and a T wave. Now, before you get all discombobulated, this gibberish will make sense in a minute. The heart has 4 chambers. 2 chambers known as the atria and 2 chambers known as the ventricles. What happens during a normal cardiac cycle is blood is squeezed from the atria to the ventricles and from the ventricles to either the pulmonary circulation or the systemic circulation. This occurs thanks to the flow of electrical current from the atria to the ventricles. Let's look at it this way. The electrical current begins in the sinoatrial node, which is a natural pacemaker of the heart. From the sinoatrial node, the current flows through the atria to the AV node. This flow of electrical current results in the atria depolarization. You get your P wave. The atria contracts. Blood is squeezed from the atria into the ventricles. From the AV node, the current flows through the bundle of His, then through the left and right bundle branches, then through the Purkinje fibers, resulting in the contraction of the ventricles. To allow the blood to flow into the pulmonary or systemic circulation, you get your QRS complex. Fancy name again, ventricular depolarization. When the ventricle relaxes after it has contracted, that's where you get your T wave. And this is known as ventricular repolarization. But hold on, I've told you about atrial depolarization when the atria is squeezed, ventricular depolarization when the ventricle is squeezed, ventricular repolarization when the ventricle relaxes. So where is the repolarization for the atria? The relaxation of the atria or atrial repolarization occurs at the same time as the ventricular depolarization. So when the ventricle is contracting, the atria is relaxing, it's repolarizing. But because the ventricular depolarization is so big, it dwarfs atrial repolarization, so you do not see it on an ECG trace. So now that we've made sense of this basic pattern, how do we put it into practice? So the first thing you do when you get an ECG is to check the patient ID to make sure this ECG belongs to the person you think is supposed to belong to. After doing that, you look at the rhythm strip. The rhythm strip is normally at the bottom, and this normally tends to be the lead 2. So you look at lead 2 and you try to figure out the rates and the rhythm. To determine the rate, you determine the rates by counting 30 squares, big ones, on the ECG strip. And this should normally be equivalent to 6 seconds. Then you count the number of QRS complexes within these 30 squares, after which you multiply this number by 10 to give you the beats per minute, like so. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then you multiply this by 10. So 10 times 10, in this case, will give us 100 beats per minute. If this were 6, it would be 6 times 10, give us 60 beats per minute. How do we make sense of this? If you calculate the rate, and the rate is below 60, this is known as a bradycardia, i.e., this is a slow heart rate. If this rate, however, is above 100, this is a tachycardia, fast heart rate. So after calculating the rate, we can then move on to calculate the rhythm. You calculate the rhythm of an ECG trace by putting a paper and marking the peaks of the QRS complexes. Let's say you mark 3, and then you slide it across. If the trace is regular, these peaks will match the subsequent 3. If it does not match it, this is an irregular heartbeat. So in this video, we've gone through the basic physiology of the heart. we know it has 4 chambers and it pumps blood around the body. We understand what a P wave is, we understand what a QRS complex is, and we understand what a T wave is. We are now able to calculate the rhythm and the rates of an ECG trace. In the subsequent video, we will look at the different types of heart blocks to get a greater understanding of how these things work. But for the beginning, I think this is enough. I'll catch you in the next video. It's your boy OT, and salute.